Welcome back to the deep dive. You know, Nietzsche's always kind of fascinated me, but uh, to be honest, sometimes I get a little lost in the abstract ideas.
Yeah, I get that.
But for this deep dive, the sources you sent over, connecting his philosophy to his health struggles, I have to say it's really clicked for me in a whole new way.
It is a fascinating angle, isn't it? Really flips the script on how we usually think about philosophy.
It does.
Nietzsche argued that to understand a philosopher, you really have to understand their physical state, their lived experience with health and illness. It's crucial to grasping their ideas.
Okay, so this is not your typical philosophy lecture. Where do we even begin?
Well, I think the most radical starting point is Nietzsche completely rejected this mind-body split.
Okay.
You know, that classic Western philosophical tradition, putting the mind on a pedestal,
Oh, yeah.
treating the body as just a vessel.
Yeah, like the mind is pure and rational, and the body is this messy physical thing that just gets in the way.
Exactly. But for Nietzsche, the body isn't just some afterthought.
Okay.
He saw the mind and body as completely intertwined. Interesting.
With the body forming the foundation of all thought.
So it's not just our bodies influence our thinking. He's saying our physical experiences are shaping how we understand the world.
Precisely. And you can see this reflected in how he reframes some classic philosophical ideas.
Okay.
Take Descartes' famous, "I think, therefore I am."
Yeah.
Nietzsche would likely counter with something like, "I feel, therefore I am."
Wow.
For him, our
Hmm.
senses, our emotions, our physical sensations, they're all primary to our experience of being.
That is a huge shift in perspective.
It is.
This has major implications for how we read Nietzsche, right?
Absolutely. If the body is so central to his philosophy, then a philosopher's own health, their vitality or lack thereof, becomes a key lens for understanding their ideas.
You know, in one of the sources you sent over, the author actually suggests you could almost diagnose a philosopher's health based on their ideas.
Well, maybe not literally diagnose.
Right.
But Nietzsche argued that a philosopher's physical condition could really influence their outlook.
He observed that philosophers in good health often had life-affirming philosophies, whereas those that were ill or frail were much more likely to gravitate towards pessimism and nihilism.
So it's like when I have a cold and suddenly everything seems just a little bit worse.
Exactly. He believed that declining health could actually kind of warp a philosopher's perspective.
Interesting.
It make them more prone to seeing life as meaningless or full of suffering.
Okay, so who was Nietzsche calling out here? Were there any philosophers he specifically saw as being, let's say, a little too influenced by their aches and pains?
He was definitely not shy about naming names. One of his main targets was Arthur Schopenhauer, the poster child for philosophical pessimism.
Oh, yeah. Schopenhauer, the guy who basically said life is just one big struggle and then you die.
Oh, you're putting it a bit bluntly, but essentially, yes.
Right.
And Nietzsche saw Schopenhauer's focus on suffering and the futility of life as stemming from weakness of spirit,
Okay.
a lack of vitality. He argued that Schopenhauer's gloomy philosophy was really just a reflection of his own physical and emotional state.
So Nietzsche suggesting that maybe Schopenhauer just needed like a good walk in the sunshine.
Perhaps. But on a more serious note, Nietzsche believed that if Schopenhauer had cultivated more physical and mental strength, his philosophy might have embraced a more life-affirming perspective.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
In another source, you pointed out that Nietzsche also took aim at certain religious traditions too, right?
He did, particularly Christianity, which he saw as another example of this life-denying tendency.
Uh-huh.
The emphasis on self-denial suffering and the afterlife, Nietzsche saw those as symptoms of a sick culture,
Oh.
a turning away from the fullness of life here and now.
So he's saying these philosophies and religious views aren't just abstract ideas. They're rooted in a certain way of being in the world.
That's exactly it. And this is where his concept of the will to power comes into play.
Okay. This is the part where I usually get a bit lost.
Yeah.
It always sounds so aggressive, almost like ruthless ambition.
Yeah, it's definitely been misunderstood and misrepresented over the years. The will to power isn't about dominating others or seeking external power. It's about a much deeper, more fundamental drive for growth and self-overcoming.
So it's more like an internal strength, a force that pushes us to become the best versions of ourselves.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's about embracing challenges, pushing our limits, and striving to fully express our potential. And this, for Nietzsche, is profoundly connected to our physical well-being.
Okay.
He argued that a strong, healthy body is better equipped to channel this will to power and to meet life's challenges head-on.
Makes sense. It's like if you're physically depleted, it's harder to find the energy and resilience to face difficult situations, let alone strive for something greater.
Exactly. And this leads us to another fascinating aspect of Nietzsche's thought. He was very critical of what we might call extreme wellness today,
Okay.
practices that involve denying the body its pleasures and needs. He saw these as forms of unhealthy suppression,
Interesting.
almost like a fear of really embracing life.
So you're saying he wouldn't be a fan of all those juice cleanses and extreme diets?
Well, he might not condemn them outright, but he would definitely question the motivation behind them.
Okay.
Is this self-denial coming from a place of genuine strength and self-mastery? Or is it driven by fear weakness or a desire to punish the body?
That's a really interesting distinction. It's not about the practice itself, it's the underlying intention behind it.
Precisely. For Nietzsche, true strength comes from embracing the fullness of life,
Yeah.
both the joys and the sorrows, the pleasures and the pains. It's about not trying to escape or deny any aspect of our embodied experience.
So finding that balance between pushing ourselves and accepting our limits.
Exactly. And this makes his personal story even more fascinating because, as you know, Nietzsche himself suffered from chronic health problems throughout his life.
Yeah. Wasn't he plagued by migraines and all sorts of other ailments? It almost seems like a contradiction.
It does, doesn't it?
He's advocating for this philosophy of strength and vitality while dealing with significant physical limitations.
It's a great point. But I think his personal struggles actually strengthen his philosophy rather than undermining it.
How so?
Well, Nietzsche wasn't preaching some blissful ignorance of suffering. He wasn't advocating for some naive optimism. He knew firsthand the challenges of a frail body. He lived them every day.
So he wasn't advocating for some superhuman strength that transcends all human limitations.
No, not at all. He believed that even in the face of suffering, even with a body that often betrayed him, we still have the power to overcome, to transmute those struggles into strength and insight. His philosophy is about resilience in the face of real lived challenges.
Wow, that puts a whole new spin on his work. It's not about denying the reality of suffering, but finding a way to create meaning and growth within those limitations.
Exactly. And I think that's one of the most powerful and enduring aspects of his philosophy. It offers a path forward, not by ignoring the hard parts of life, but by finding a way to integrate them into a more holistic and life-affirming perspective.
This is already blowing my mind. I think we need to take a pause here, but I'm definitely eager to keep exploring these ideas.
Me too. There's so much more to unpack here.
So stick around for part 2, where we'll delve deeper into how Nietzsche's philosophy of the body can help us navigate the complexities of modern life. Okay, I'm back and ready to dive back into Nietzsche.
Sounds good.
In the last part, we were talking about how he saw the body as like this foundation for our whole worldview,
Yeah.
which is pretty radical when you think about it.
Yeah.
But I have to admit, I'm still grappling with what this all means practically, you know? Like, how does this play out in the way we live our lives?
It's a great question, and it gets to why Nietzsche is still so relevant today.
Yeah.
He wasn't just interested in abstract theories.
Right.
He believed that philosophy should be a lived experience, a guide to a more meaningful and fulfilling life.
So it's not just reading Nietzsche, it's about embodying his ideas.
Exactly. And when it comes to his philosophy of the body,
Yeah.
there are some profound implications for how we approach our health and well-being, and even our sense of purpose.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Break this down for me.
Well, one of the things that struck me in the sources you sent was this idea of health as a philosophical value.
Right.
Nietzsche didn't just see health as an absence of disease or physical fitness.
Yeah.
It was a way of being in the world,
Uh-huh.
a kind of vitality that infused all aspects of life.
So it's like this energy that fuels our creativity, our resilience, our capacity for joy.
Exactly. And he saw a direct link between this robust health
Okay.
and the ability to embrace a life-affirming philosophy.
Makes sense.
In fact, he was very critical of philosophers who he felt were using their ideas to justify their own physical or emotional decline.
You know, that reminds me of something I was struggling with in one of the articles.
Yeah.
It talked about Nietzsche calling out Schopenhauer for being too pessimistic.
Uh.
But wasn't Schopenhauer just being realistic about the suffering in the world?
It's a fair point, and this is where Nietzsche gets really interesting.
Okay.
He wasn't denying the reality of suffering.
Right.
He knew firsthand how much pain and hardship life could throw our way,
Wow.
but he believed that a truly healthy philosophy should empower us to overcome those challenges, not wallow in them.
So it's not about ignoring the negative, but finding a way to like transmute it, to turn it into something that fuels our growth.
Exactly, and this ties back to the will to power. It's this inner strength that allows us to confront challenges head on, to push our boundaries, to constantly strive for self-improvement.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this all connects. So for Nietzsche, health is not just a physical state. It's almost like a moral imperative. Like, we have a responsibility to cultivate this vitality, this will to power, in order to fully embrace life.
That's a great way to put it. And I think this has huge implications for how we navigate the complexities of modern life. Because let's be honest, our culture doesn't exactly make it easy to prioritize well-being, does it?
Tell me about it.
Yeah.
We're constantly bombarded with messages about productivity, achievement,
Yeah.
the hustle culture.
Right.
It's like we're always pushing ourselves to the limit, and sometimes I wonder if we're losing sight of what truly matters.
I think Nietzsche would be deeply concerned by this. In one of his books, Twilight of the Idols, he actually warns against what he calls the sickness of modern man.
Wow.
He saw this obsession with work progress material gain as a kind of spiritual emptiness, a forgetting of the body and its needs.
So he's saying that this pursuit of more is making us sick, literally and figuratively.
I think that's a very Nietzschean reading of our current situation.
Yeah.
He believed that a society that neglects the health and well-being of its citizens is a society in decline.
So what's the antidote? What would Nietzsche prescribe for this modern malaise?
I don't think he'd offer easy answers or quick fixes, but I
Right.
think he would encourage us to reevaluate our priorities.
Okay.
To ask ourselves, what truly brings us joy? What nourishes our bodies and souls? What kind of life do we want to create for ourselves and for future generations?
It's almost like he's asking us to slow down, to reconnect with our bodies, to pay attention to what truly matters.
Exactly, and to make choices that align with those values, even if it means rejecting some of the dominant narratives of our culture.
You know, this makes me think about the concept of amor fati that I came across in one of the articles, this idea of loving one's fate.
Yes,
Would you say that's connected to what we're talking about here?
absolutely. Amorphaki is about embracing life in its entirety,
Hmm.
with all its joys and sorrows, triumphs and setbacks. It's about saying yes to the present moment, to the reality of our embodied experience, even when it's difficult.
So it's not about passive acceptance. It's about actively choosing to find meaning and purpose within the circumstances we're given.
Exactly. And for Nietzsche, that requires cultivating a deep sense of self-awareness,
Oh,
of listening to our bodies and our instincts,
right.
and having the courage to live in accordance with our own inner truth.
That's such a powerful message.
Yeah.
And it makes me realize that Nietzsche isn't just some abstract philosopher from the past.
Yeah.
His ideas are incredibly relevant for how we live our lives right now in this very moment.
That's what's so fascinating about Nietzsche.
Yeah.
He was writing over a century ago, but his insights into the human condition, our desires, our fears, our potential for both greatness and self-destruction,
Yeah.
feel more timely than ever.
I think this conversation has given me a whole new appreciation for Nietzsche and for how his ideas can help us navigate the challenges of modern life. But I'm also feeling like we've just scratched the surface.
Me too.
There's so much more to explore here.
Definitely. I agree. There are so many layers to Nietzsche's thought, and I'm really enjoying this deep dive into his work.
So for all of you listening, make sure to join us for part 3, where we'll wrap up our exploration of Nietzsche's philosophy of the body and consider its implications for the future. Welcome back to the deep dive. We've been exploring this fascinating connection between Nietzsche's philosophy and his health struggles, and it's really changed how I see his work.
I agree.
In the last part, we were talking about how Nietzsche saw this really deep link between our physical well-being and our ability to embrace a life-affirming perspective.
Yeah.
But now I'm kind of curious to shift our focus to the future. How do you think his ideas about the body can help us navigate the challenges we're facing today, and where might they lead us in the years to come?
Well, it's a great question because even though he was writing over a century ago,
Right.
his insights feel so prescient, almost like he was anticipating some of these dilemmas we're grappling with right now.
Okay, I'm all ears. What connections do you see between his ideas and what's happening in the world today?
Well, one thing that jumps out at me is this growing awareness of the mind-body connection.
Yeah.
It's everywhere these days. The rise of mindfulness and meditation, the focus on gut health and the microbiome.
It's like we're finally catching up to what Nietzsche was saying all along, that our physical and mental states are inseparable.
Exactly. And, Nietzsche might not have endorsed all the specific practices we're seeing today,
Right.
but the underlying principle totally aligns with his philosophy. He understood that our bodies aren't just these vessels we inhabit. They're integral to how we experience and make meaning of the world.
So how do we move beyond just acknowledging this connection to actually applying it to our lives and to society?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is.
I think Nietzsche offers some valuable clues. One area where his ideas could have a real impact is in how we approach healthcare.
Okay, I'm interested to hear more about this. What would a Nietzschean approach to healthcare look like?
Well, traditionally, Western medicine has had a very reactive approach,
Okay.
focusing on treating diseases after they arise.
So you're saying he would advocate for a more preventative approach, like a focus on cultivating health rather than just treating illness.
Exactly. He saw health as this dynamic process, a kind of vital force that needs to be nurtured and sustained throughout life.
Right.
It's not just about the absence of disease, it's about cultivating a state of thriving.
So less about going to the doctor when we're sick and more about the choices we make every day that support our well-being.
Exactly. And this includes everything from our diet and exercise to our social connections, our work-life balance, even our engagement with art and nature.
Yeah, this reminds me of something we were discussing earlier about Nietzsche's critique of the sick culture of his time.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think you would see any parallels with our modern obsession with productivity and achievement?
Absolutely. I think he'd be very concerned by what he might call our cult of busyness.
Yeah.
This constant pressure to achieve, to optimize, to be on all the time.
It's exhausting.
It is incredibly depleting, both physically and mentally.
It's like we've lost sight of the fact that we're actually embodied beings with limits. We need rest, we need play, we need connection, we need meaning beyond just checking things off a to-do list.
Exactly. And I think his philosophy offers a powerful antidote to that way of being. He reminds us that a truly fulfilling life is not about maximizing output or accumulating possessions.
Yeah.
It's about cultivating a deep and embodied sense of joy, meaning, and purpose.
So how do we translate these ideas into action? How do we create a society that prioritizes well-being, not just for the few, but for everyone?
It's a huge challenge, and there's no easy answer. But I think Nietzsche's emphasis on individual responsibility is a good place to start.
Okay.
We each have a role to play in cultivating our own health and vitality, and in creating the conditions for others to do the same.
So it's about making conscious choices in our own lives,
Yeah.
but also about advocating for policies and systems that support collective well-being.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing that our individual health is deeply intertwined with the health of our communities and the planet as a whole. We need to shift from a mindset of scarcity and competition
Right.
to one of abundance and cooperation.
This has been such a mind-expanding conversation. I feel like we've just barely scratched the surface of Nietzsche's thought.
Me too.
But I'm walking away with a whole new appreciation for his relevance to our lives today.
That's great to hear.
What about for our listeners who might be feeling a bit overwhelmed by all this? What's one key takeaway you hope they'll remember?
I think the most important thing is that Nietzsche reminds us that we are not just thinking beings, we are feeling beings.
Right.
We experience the world through our bodies, and those experiences shape who we are and what we believe. So pay attention to your body, listen to its wisdom, and nurture it with care and respect.
A beautiful sentiment to end on.
Yeah.
I think it perfectly captures the essence of Nietzsche's philosophy of the body. It's not about denying our physicality or transcending it. It's about embracing it, understanding it, and using it as a source of strength, creativity, and joy. Well, on that note, we'll wrap up our deep dive into Nietzsche. Thank you for joining us on this journey, and we hope it's inspired you to think a little differently about your own relationship with your body and with the world around you.